In a previous video, one of you had commented in the comments asking for me to do an analysis on polyamory and ethical non-monogamy, so that's what I wanted to do today. First, I want to just quickly provide you a summary of this piece in the New Yorker because it talks about how polyamory became so popular to begin with, or at least the perception of it becoming popular. With this piece, I have a tool I use that I can read stuff behind paywalls, so I did that and I can summarize it. Usually if I were to record something, I would pony up and pay to show it because I just think that's like the ethical thing to do. But some of the stuff that comes out of the New Yorker is just such slop and garbage that I didn't think this was really worth it. So I'll just give you the quick summary. The author here highlights several examples of TV shows and books and movies and ideas festivals where polyamory has come up in recent years. So they reference Succession, they reference White Lotus, which I know are two really big TV series that people talk a lot about. Talks about like the Aspen Ideas Festival and South by Southwest. Those are two areas where topics like this are coming up. And also in therapy culture, like polyamory has become the feminist weapon of choice for their therapy clients in order to solve marital problems. So that's really where this is becoming more and more normalized. It's not necessarily that people are becoming more polyamorous per se, but it is represented in culture and manifested so explicitly that the perception of it becoming more and more popular is now mainstream. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Like, just because you see something on TV doesn't mean it's necessarily representative of the general population. I think the trans movement is a perfect example of this, and LGBTQ, right? Like, there's only a minority of people that are LGBTQ, traditionally, lesbian or gay, and then there are a minority of people who are openly trans. Yep. Go peruse Netflix, and you'll have no shortage of shows where one or two, if not three, of the primary characters have some sort of gender affiliation or LGBTQ. Like it's just so ubiquitous to the point where like I've just stopped watching shows, and it's not because I'm anti-trans per se or anti-gay. Like, I just don't care. But like it feels so forced at this point, and it's not reflective of society. If 1% of your population is trans, but all of your characters and every single show that's coming up on Netflix has to also be trans, like clearly that doesn't match the general population. It's creating an image of something that's normal that clearly is not like mainstream, right? And so I don't want to participate in how this is playing out and like how like ideas like this are being transmitted across culture, because this is exactly what happens, right? Ideas like this become culture, and then we take it as normal. And in reality, like Main Street America, everyday average Americans who just want a traditional marriage, traditional gender roles, like that, it has become more and more suspect. So I think we have to push back on the culture that is imposing these norms and values onto us. It talks in the piece, too, about where polyamory came about, and it really started during the 1960s, during the sexual revolution, so that shouldn't come as a surprise. But one of the things that shocked me, and I think is really important to caveat with this, is that there's a correlation between polyamory and socialist utopian societies. So they kind of go hand in hand. And you see this more recently with Sam Bankman-Fried from FTX. He was, found guilty of running a massive crypto Ponzi scheme. He was part of this polycule in I think it was the Bahamas. And polycules are like polyamory on steroids. So instead of having like one person or like a throuple or like one person with like multiple partners, it's like a group of people who interacts with each other. So things get very, very messy with that. But you saw Sam Bankman-Fried was part of a polycule community, but he also was very much a believer in effective altruism. So this philosophy that capitalists in Silicon Valley who have the means to deploy capital should do so for the maximization of human good and human benefit. So you're seeing the integration of like economic concepts, relationships, and like philosophy all kind of intermingled. And so when you see polyamory rising in perception of popularity and culture, that should trigger alarm bells for you, because there's a clear correlation between the presence of polyamory and polyamorous relationships and social utopian societies. And so the idea with polyamory is you're not committed to anyone sexually or romantically, and that obviously raises questions about finances and assets. Like, if you think of how a marriage is structured with regard to the state, I'm not talking about the religious institution of marriage. That's a covenant, in front of God between a man and woman. I'm just talking about within a state, right? So the state governs marriages through issuing a license and certifies that. And it really determines like how assets are owned and shared, right? So in much the same way, like you can go onto LegalZoom and file for an LLC or a corporation, like you can go to your local county clerk's office and get a marriage license and join into a union with another person. And then if you get divorced, like you see this in divorce courts, it's really all about the distribution of assets, right? Obviously this will come up in like counseling and therapy and stuff, but you rarely see judges in divorce courts talk about the emotional baggage and the burden of a divorce. It's always like, okay, who's going to pay for who gets what, right? Who's going to pay for the kids if there's kids involved? It's, how much is alimony? It's all about the economics of the marriage itself. So fundamentally, from a state perspective, like marriage is an economic vehicle. And so when you start degrading marriage and you start opening it up to thruples and polycules, it creates an open gateway for socialism at scale. It's like, okay, if it's no longer between a man and a woman, it's no longer defined by a nuclear family or a household, we're going to start accepting polycules and utopian societies. Like, clearly the only way for that to work is to get rid of private ownership, to distribute wealth across all of the members of that group. Everything is communal, right? So you don't have any ownership of things. So I think that's like where we're going and why we should be like kind of put the guardrails up when it comes to polyamory and ethical non-monogamy, whatever that means. Like, yeah, there's certainly like the religious and the conservative and the like spiritual case to be made, but just objectively speaking, as even just a secular society, if you like freedom and capitalism and private property ownership, like this stuff permeating in culture is a snowball into greater socialism and the ascendance of socialism over capitalism. So I would be on guard with this. So I want to turn now to a piece that was published in Public Square magazine. I'll note this is a LDS, so a Mormon Church affiliated publication, and the two authors here are affiliated with Brigham Young University, which is the Mormon Church's official like university. So there is a obvious like Mormon bent to this. I don't necessarily think that's wrong though, considering that the Mormons do have a strong reputation of family relationships, although it's interesting too because of their history with polygamy and having multiple wives. So I find it fascinating on the one hand that the Mormon Church has become like the paragon of the nuclear family unit in the modern day, but when Mormonism was coming up in the 19th century, they were like kicked out of New York and Illinois and ended up fleeing to Utah because of polygamy. So I think that's kind of interesting that they would be pushing back on polyamory. But anyways, these are two like family studies experts who have done research on this. This was published a couple of years ago. But I think it has, they bring about some interesting points. Obviously, they open up by highlighting, some examples in the media, right? So HBO's Big Love. So they talk about how it's permeating in culture, but they talk here about the popularity of polyamory and how really statistically it's not becoming a thing. So they did a study in 2018. I would be curious to see an updated study of this, but they found that 1% of married couples report they are in what they define as consensual non-monogamous, same thing as ethical non-monogamous relationship, and 4% at some point while in their marriage they were involved in it. So really we're talking about a minority of people here, and the distinction here, and I think what's important, why keeping culture in the back of your mind and understanding the cultural emergence of polyamory versus the actual emergence of polyamory, is that culturally it seems to be far more ubiquitous than it actually is. And I think a really good example of this too is on the dating apps, right? Like I remember when I was dating and, on the apps, it seemed like every single person had that in their profile, and I was weirded out by it. I think 2021 was probably the first time I encountered a person in real life who identified with this. It was a friend I grew up with from high school, who I randomly happened to bump into when I was in Arizona. And so just in conversation, they had brought up that they had multiple partners, and I was kind of weirded out by that. But then in 2022, 2023, I started meeting people in real life who were like practicing this. And the things I observed, and again, this is just my observation, it was either people who were trying to fix a broken marriage and ethical non-monogamy polyamory was like a Hail Mary to try to save their marriage, or it was people who within their marriage, like one person's needs weren't being fully met, and so polyamory was a concession that the other person made in order to help their husband or their wife feel like their needs were being met. So those are kind of the cases I've observed with polyamory. I'd be curious to know if you've encountered anything different. But anyways, I think like on the apps, I started noticing this, and I think that's because maybe more and more people are trying to do this as a solution to failing marriages, or like stressed marriages where the needs of the other someone isn't being met, and so they're taking to the apps. So in combination with culture, you're starting to see this proliferate on the dating apps, and so it creates the illusion that there's more of this and it's more normalized than it is, when really it's just a minority of people who are actually engaged in these types of relationships. So it says, based on their research, that younger Americans are more interested in polyamory. Interestingly enough, 41% of millennials, which kind of doesn't, but also kind of surprises me. I mean, Gen Z is definitely more conservative, not just politically, I think culturally as well. I think millennials are certainly a lot more liberal in that regard. And then also it talks about LGBT plus individuals are also significantly more open to these kinds of relationships. And I mean, that makes sense. They're not really like homosexual relationships compared to heterosexual are less committed to one another, and you see that in the culture, like just talk to any gay guy at a gay bar and just learn about that culture and how it works. Like there's a lot of just physical interactions. There's not necessarily like the emotional commitment that you would see in an otherwise monogamous marriage. So that kind of makes sense. Okay, so they say here, in the near future, the popularity of marital polyamory will likely eclipse same-sex marriage, which currently this is only about 1% of U.S. marriages. So this is really important because I hadn't appreciated this argument when same-sex marriage came into law. I think that was in 2015. I want to say 2014, maybe 2013, and in the 2010s. I forget off the top of my head, but when the Supreme Court said, okay, same-sex marriage is permitted, I think I, like most young people, was like, yeah, of course. Like, why wouldn't we want this? Like, everyone, even if you love who you love and it doesn't matter, everyone should be treated equally. And I think when you look at it in terms of homosexual and heterosexual relationships, I think that logical argument stands. But I know I wasn't thinking about this, and I'm sure a lot of people also weren't thinking about this. It's the problem isn't that the gay versus the straight marriages, it's what comes after gay. Like, I don't think anyone was asking that question, or I'm sure actually people probably were, but because they were conservative and likely Christian, they were put down for it. But I think this is relevant now because we're starting to see this manifest. So you're seeing this with ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. So you have relationships with multiple groups of people. You're seeing it with polycules, but you're also seeing it with artificial intelligence, right? You already have cases of people proposing to AI chatbots and AI agents. Like, once we get to a point where there's a humanoid robot outfitted with artificial intelligence, is that relationship going to have the same protections as a traditional marriage? And if you can't provide the protections to a polycule or an AI robotic partnership that you can provide to a traditional marriage, like that represents not just the erosion of the institution of marriage itself, it represents the erosion of the rule of law, right? Because like I said, like we're talking about contracts here, we're talking about like ownership of things and that, like that's what gay marriage came down to, right? Like I think everyone could get on board with, okay, if you have, you've been with your partner for 20 plus years, like they should have the same beneficiary rights, right? Like that I have, or they should have the same like visitation rights at a hospital that is only given, spousal privileges, immunity, right? Like those are the things I think like I was thinking about when same-sex marriage passed. And I think a lot of like rational level-headed people probably would agree with that. Like if you're in a committed relationship with someone, like they shouldn't have less rights to hospital visitation than you do simply because like spousal privileges haven't been granted to them. Like I think we can all probably agree on that. The issue is what comes after. And so if you can't, if we said, okay, we can guarantee spousal privileges to heterosexual couples and not homosexual couples, but we can't really do that with polycules and definitely not with AI robotics, well, then the logical solution, in order to be the most inclusive as possible, is to get rid of all spousal protections, right? So it represents the erosion of rights because the rule of law can't be enforced equitably across all members of society. And as we expand what is permissible in terms of relationships and marriages and partnerships, we have to make sure the law encompasses everyone. Otherwise, you're going to see what we see now in culture, where people are pissed off all the time because we're being exclusive, and the people are being told that they can't have certain rights because of who they love or how they identify. And so I think that will only continue to increase and exacerbate as we move forward. So I think we kind of have to draw a line in the sand now. And I'm making the case here, like objectively, logically. Like of course, I think there's a religious and a spiritual case to be made. I'm not trying to make that. I think a lot of other people do a far better job making that case. Like my case here is objectively, like, can you have a society governed under the rule of law when the institutions in which that society is built around, so marriage, are slowly eroded by being too inclusive to entities that make it hard for the state to enforce the rule of law? Like, how can my husband and I have the same rights as some Reddit chick and her AI chatbot husband? Like there's no world where, at the moment at least, there's no world where that type of relationship should have the same rights and privileges as my husband and I do. But as we continue to make acceptances, it's a snowball effect until this happens. And I think the next logical concession that will probably have to be made will be made with poly relationships. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. Okay, so it says here, popularizing polyamory, fueling this growing popularity is the fact that popular media and academic writing are doing their part to celebrate the practice. Like I said, there's that piece in the New Yorker, but also you're seeing it in film and in TV, and people are bringing it to ideas festivals. You're seeing it practiced by the FTX folks and Sam Bankman-Fried. So you're seeing it more and more talked about. You're seeing it on the dating apps. So it's definitely becoming perceived to be more mainstream than I think in practice it actually is. Okay. So it dives in here. So another academic was analyzing the changing nature of modern marriage and was recommending that polyamory relationships are a remedy or a love hack. And he suggests that partners' differences and sexual needs and wants, which he argues is a common modern and gendered marital malady, can be conveniently handled by loosening the reins of monogamy. So the argument here is traditional boundaries that define relationships. So marriage between man and woman, monogamy, gender roles, like all of that is the problem. People are diagnosing that as the problem for relationship issues. Therefore, if you get rid of all of those things, the issues go away. It's ironic, though, because later on in this piece, you'll see one of the big issues with these types of relationships is that it relies on a lot of communication and for many people, communication is the number one cause. Communication breakdown is the number one cause for divorces, and it's communicating on across all sorts of things. So, people say, well, a lot of people get divorced because of money. Yeah, money might be part of it, but it could also be like communicating about money. So I think that is interesting because the problem might not necessarily be the defined roles we have, but how we communicate with one another about those roles. So this might be a clear example of misdiagnosing the problem. Okay, it says here, this is kind of what I was saying above, legal journals too are punctuated with sophisticated arguments for why polyamorous marriages must be constitutionally protected. One note in the Harvard Law Review said, if one form of same-sex marriage deserves dignity, so does the others. And that's what I'm saying. This is a slippery slope that, okay, we've made one concession and we've permitted same-sex marriages. Okay, now what comes next, right? So again, polyamory, AI, based relationships. Bestiality is another one that's kind of like super taboo, but could be. And then obviously underage relationships, again, like this is another taboo topic, but it's a big one. Like if gender is a construct, if gender is, if gender is made up, well, age is too. And a clear example of that is you have your chronological age. So I am 34 years old. I was born in 1991. It is 2025. Therefore, I have been alive for 34 years. So you can chronologically age someone. But you can also biologically age someone. We're seeing this in the biohacking community. I mean, I have it on my scale and on my Garmin. Like I did a DEXA scan like a year or two ago. And so like that gives you some of your biological age as well based on your physical fitness. So even though I am biologically a 34-year-old woman, like I have the physiology of someone in like their mid to late 20s, right? So I'm biologically a few years younger than I am chronologically. So if you look at age, like it's not actually a fixed point in time. It just depends on what definition of age you're looking at. You're looking at your biological age or your chronological age. And so this obviously raises questions. And of course, people lie about their age all the time. But so what happens, if we start accepting, okay, well, gender is a construct, so too is age. Therefore, why can't a 16-year-old girl who's fallen in love with a 40-something, why can't they go get married? Why can't that be permitted, right? So that's another example as well. And I think a lot of people probably would say, yeah, we don't need children going off and getting married like that. So yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's a slippery slope that we have to manage, because once you make one concession, it can open the doors to others. Okay, so it goes on to say, across all these different areas of writing, popular media, academic and legal, we are being nudged towards increased acceptance and approval of polyamory. And this is what's happening. And this is why it's important to talk about this, because whether it's like overt representation of polyamorous relationships in film or talking about it positively in think pieces and at ideas festivals, or whether it's the denouncement of marriage itself. I've done separate videos on these, but there's a push right now amongst feminists to they want to seek validation for their childless cat lady status. So they're trying to downplay marriage as the source of happiness in women's lives, and they're trying to celebrate being single and being able to have a satisfying life as a single woman. So they're trying to change the narrative around marriage in order to fit their objectives. But the same thing would happen in this case too. It's not even just the positive portrayal of polyamory. It's downplaying traditional marriage itself and suggesting that there could be alternatives. One might be just staying single. The other could be a multi-person relationship. And so I think it's important to be mindful that we are indeed being nudged passively through this. And it's just how it comes up in culture. And this is why the culture wars are so important. And I confess, like, I didn't understand this. When I was growing up in an evangelical Baptist church, I was constantly being bombarded by the women in the church in particular, not to conform or be of this world, to kind of reject things of the world, reject like the music and the movies. I mean, I had friends who, one in particular, she was homeschooled. They didn't have internet. And when they got internet, like it was tightly controlled on how she was allowed to use it. She couldn't watch any movies above a G rating. And even when she did, like most of the stuff she consumed was like Veggie Tales. she wasn't allowed to listen to the radio except for Family Life Network, which was the local Christian radio station. And like her only social interactions were church and like homeschool groups, right? So that's a very intense example. But there were people who like shunned modern culture. I mean, oh gosh, like I got in not trouble, but like a lot of the parents in the youth group like told their kids not to hang out with me because I read Harry Potter. I loved Harry Potter, and I would bring the books with me like when they first got released. Like I would stay up all night and try to read them, so I'd bring them to church and read them in between, Sunday school and sermon. And so I would bring them with me, and people like knew I loved Harry Potter, and so like this was a big thing at the time where like everyone was like, no, not Harry Potter. So there was a clear pushback against culture growing up, and I didn't quite understand why the people in my church were so anti-culture and were so obsessed with like C.S. Lewis and Christian culture and Christian movies and VeggieTales and all that kind of stuff. But now seeing this, I get it, because I didn't understand that the culture was planting seeds and ideas into my head that would have manifested in my adult life into things like feminism, or into things like questioning whether or not to have children, or passively accepting things like climate change, or accepting abortion. Like I didn't know culture was the mechanism through which the seeds that these ideas would eventually manifest were being planted at the time. And so when you're 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, you don't think anything of it. You just want to watch the movies everyone else is watching and participate in culture. But really, if you follow the logic with this, and you're seeing how the seeds of polyamory are now being planted as acceptable within culture, you can go back to the culture you grew up in and probably see the same thing with other topics. So it's clear the seeds are being planted for this, and we're being pushed in this direction, and it's imperative to kind of push back. And I think that's what a lot of conservatives are doing right now, and I think rightfully so. Okay. So this dives into like why these types of relationships don't work. Like I said, communication skills are problematic. A lot of us struggle with communication. I'm no exception. I'm a writer, but like even I struggle communicating things. With everyone in my life, not just my husband, but like everyone. Like communication is definitely I think a challenge that every human faces. And so when you enter into a polyamory relationship, you're dialing up the requirement to communicate more, because it's not even just like communicating about who you're going to be with and where. There's boundaries that have to be managed and maintained, and rules that have to be adhered to. And so you have to constantly navigate a complex environment requiring intense communication skills that the vast majority of us like don't have. So just practically speaking, like these relationships are destined to fail because people can't communicate. And then of course it talks about emotional regulation, which is another big issue. A lot of these people who are pursuing these relationships, they're being governed by their emotions rather than their minds. And like, just because you are infatuated with someone, like, doesn't necessarily mean you are in love with them. Like, there are different ways people can experience an infatuated version of love that isn't legitimate love. And if you are completely always taking action based on how you feel, and your identity changes with how you feel, like, obviously this is a problem, and we can see this in culture or in society right now, right? Like, we're all being asked to affirm a bunch of beliefs held by delusional people, and like accept it. Like, we're like, women have to accept men, biological men, in private women's spaces because those men have decided to wear earrings, maybe put on some lipstick, maybe wear a dress and call themselves a woman, and we're just expected to have to conform to their delusion. Like, it's clear people are being driven by emotions, and they haven't developed the capacity to regulate those emotions. And so that is actually what is driving a lot of these relationships. They're not even built on anything of substance. Another thing they bring up here is power and equity. And this is, they raise some really good points. So it's like, if one spouse requests like an open marriage and entering into a polyamorous relationship, and the other spouse is like, I don't know about that, like it can become a zero-sum game. It's like, okay, we'll do this or I'm gone. It talks about here, if you put your career on hold to care for 2 young children, and your husband pops the polyamory question, like, how much power do you have at the moment to say no? Like, if you were completely dependent on your husband, and your husband is the one who initiates this, like, you kind of have to go along with it. So it's interesting because people talk about these types of open relationships in terms of like equality and equity, but there really is a power dynamic at play here, and it's certainly not an equitable one, and it can put people who don't actually want to go along with this into a position where they have to. Otherwise, they're going to lose everything. So I think that's important to consider. Talks about children, and it acknowledges that attention isn't given to children. So when you see this come up in the media, you see this come up in movies and film, like it's think about who's writing this stuff, right? You got a bunch of 20, 30, 40 somethings in Hollywood, probably don't have kids, right? Because LA is a very expensive place to raise kids. So they probably don't have kids of their own. They're thinking of these things from their own experience and their own perspectives. And so we're seeing their interpretation of how ideal culture should manifest. And so, of course, we've erased children, we've erased family life from the public sphere. So you're not going to see a lot of this in the movies and the film that depict this. And so we're not like we're not given the opportunity to grasp with these topics and rightfully question, like, how will this affect kids? Then obviously it says here that legal questions around children and parenting and polyamorous unions are not well settled and can lead to destructive post-breakup conflict. We already have documentation for how like divorce affects kids. Now add a throuple into the mix, and I don't think it ends well for kids. I think, and we're seeing this right now, right, with same-sex marriages. You're seeing this with adoptions and people raising kids. I don't know that there's been enough studied yet, because same-sex marriage is still so new. I don't know how much has been studied in terms of adoption and surrogacy and how same-sex couples are raising their kids and how that compares to heterosexual couples with kids. So I'd be curious to see research on that, but I think that would be a good place to start. It's like, okay, did this work out? Does this work with having two dads or two moms? Like, how do the kids end up? Okay, if it doesn't work out well, or at least compared to, happy, healthy, monogamous, same-sex households, okay, well then let's extrapolate that and be like, okay, maybe like thruple's probably not going to work well either. Okay. The next one is finances. And again, this gets back to the socialism piece. In a polyamorous pod, so like a polycule, does all the income go into the same pot? And if so, how are financial decisions made? This is, of course, a big deal. And so the more people you invite into your marriage, the more socialist your marriage's finances will have to become in order to accommodate all of the needs of the people participating in it. So it's a naturally socialistic economic system that governs the finances of these relationships. And so if this becomes more accepted and normalized and mainstream, this is a slippery slope until just socialism writ large is going to be mainstream. And we're already seeing this politically, right? So this is just an example of how culturally it's making inroads in ways people I don't think are thinking about. Okay. So they recommend here at the end to basically take more responsibility over yourself. It says, invert your thinking, make sex serve your relationship needs rather than the relationship serve your sexual wants, embrace the beautiful simplicity of monogamy. I think this is true. I think a lot of people are pursuing different things right now, relationships and otherwise, because they always think the grass is greener. I think we've been presented with an infinite realm of possibilities, and people always think, well, why would I settle when there might be something better waiting? Why would I stay with a job because there might be a better one out there? Why would I live in this particular city when I could live anywhere, right? Like there's like people are just so like allergic to commitment. They don't want to set roots down anywhere. They don't want to commit to an employer. They don't want to commit to another human being. And so we just live in this like infinite world of flow and anarchy, and just anything can go at any point in time. And I don't think that's conducive to a happy or healthy life. And I say this as someone who did travel and had all sorts of freedom. I think, Jocko is right when he says discipline equals freedom. I think you need rules and parameters around how you govern your life, and you need to figure out ways to excel within the boundaries you create for yourself. I don't think just having an infinite realm of possibilities is the best way to do it. So that's why I think embracing the simplicity of monogamy is important. I think you have to embrace the simplicity of life in general. Like, life isn't going to be like the movies. We've all been told it's going to be like the movies. It's not going to be like the movies. The movies aren't real. They're movies for a reason. And I think we create this image of how life should be and how we're supposed to feel as a result of that, right? Like, you see portrayals of emotions in film and in the media that don't match what you're feeling in your day-to-day life. Therefore, like, you can't understand why you're bored all the time or why things aren't like working out like you had wanted. And so you think you have to fix something, and people are always constantly looking for a fix. So maybe they're going to try a new gender. Maybe they're going to add a third or fourth person to their marriage. And this is where things really start to break down, because you're not actually diagnosing the real problem. And so you have to make these, I like what they say here, make sex serve your relationship needs rather than the relationship serve your sexual wants. Like, you have to figure out how to like create parameters for your life, get your needs met, and figure out how to temper your wants and temper your emotions and control your emotions. Like, you have to learn how to regulate your emotions. That is part of being an adult. And I think if you cannot do that and you're unwilling to do that, that is a sign that you are not a mature adult. So it closes here, and it quotes a video that was in The Atlantic of a young polyamorous woman, and she says, "We just want people to respect what we have." And obviously they raise some concerns here. They say, okay, but when respect requires fudging on a fundamental premise of marriage in our society, well, that's an entirely different matter. And so it doesn't just come down to respect. It's affirmation and validation. And so this is coded language that I think we've acquiesced to for far too long. We're just like, just respect me, like respect what I have. But respect isn't a two-way street in our modern society, right? Like, someone like this, like this woman quoted here, will say, respect me, respect my choice. But then if a heterosexual Christian couple were to say, hey, respect us and our choice, the respect wouldn't go both ways, right? So it's always asking for affirmation of a change to the status quo and validation of some person's what's going on in their inner world, so emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and it's starting to manifest in the physical world. It's validation of that. So we have to affirm and validate these people. And so that's what respect means here. It doesn't actually mean respect. And so that's why I think we have to draw a hard line in the sand with these types of things. Like, we have to defend traditional marriage, traditional family values, traditional gender roles, because it shows a clear deterioration. We've seen it already start to have a clear deterioration over time in how we interact with one another as society, and as we're seeing play out now, because this respect isn't a two-way street. It leads to strife and conflict. So we need to protect what works, because it's worked for millennia at this point. So clearly something's right? So don't fix what isn't broken. Keep what works, right? And let's work on ourselves individually to be better people within those systems and institutions. So if marriage works, if raising kids in a family works, then it's up to us, the adults, to make sure we are constantly improving ourselves and bettering ourselves to be better spouses and better parents, right? Like, burning everything to the ground and running off to start a polycule is not the solution. And that's what we're accepting in society right now when we tolerate all this stuff. So that's what I have for you today. I think this is a topic that there's probably more to talk about this. Like I said, it's only something I've very recently, probably within the last, like I said, four years at this point, really have heard more and more about. But I think as more and more people find themselves in broken homes and broken marriages, and they're looking for something in the outside world to fix them, they're going to start clinging on to these things. And so as culture makes it more normal, as the cultural elites at the top give their blessing and say, yes, go forth and do this, I think we'll see this start happening more and more. But in reality, I think people need to be more disciplined and steadfast in the institutions that work. Find happiness in the simple things. Stop trying to reinvent the wheel to fit around, whatever life you think you're supposed to live, because the movies aren't real, right? Like, reality is real, but the movies, it's a screen and a depiction, nothing more. So I would love to know your thoughts on this. If you've encountered polyamory, if you have any thoughts about this, where do you sit? Are you in favor of polyamory, or would you be like, nah, we need to protect traditional marriage? I'd be curious to know what you think. Definitely leave a comment below. Thank you so much for watching. And if you liked this type of commentary, definitely like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.